This is House Einstein Podcast 74, and it's an unusual podcast. We're doing a short form experiment to see how our audience likes it, and we're titling this From the Subreddit. And as a disclaimer, if you're new to the House Einstein Podcast, please remember this podcast is entertainment, and if you are looking for real estate advice, please contact your real estate agent at House Einstein. And if you're shopping for agents, visit us at houseeinstein.com, and we're more than happy to connect with you and offer you professional advice. But please don't make real estate decisions based on what you read or hear or see in this podcast.
Agreed. And I think it could be fun to call this Little Pod, but that's just ripping off another podcast I listen to.
Little Pod. Well, it's going to be short. We're going to try to keep this nice and tight. And for many years, I have been deeply entertained by a subreddit that is specific to real estate, the real estate subreddit. And often when really unusual situations arise that I stumble upon, I share them with the team, and then we sometimes have fun discussions about it. But I felt like this could be a great topic for a podcast, and we're going to jump right into it.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We serve buyers and sellers in Colorado, focusing on Boulder, Denver, and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our mission is simple: help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more.
First one, is there a downside to telling our agent not to accept any love letters? And we actually had a buyer ask us this pretty recently.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll read the full question or the full situation. And this is by an individual who goes by Pistol Rose. And they wrote, "We'll be putting our house on the market in the next couple of months. It's a small, original built house in a highly desirable neighborhood filled with high-end remodels and rebuilds. It's anticipated to have a lot of interest with people who want to live here but aren't able to afford the average high price. Our prospective realtor said, quote, expect a lot of love letters. I imagine some from flippers, but probably from sincere people too. We won't read any. I'm sympathetic in general, but our house equity is a significant part of our retirement. We'll take the best financial offer. I hate the idea that anyone would spend the time and effort and hope composing something that we won't even look at." So Hamish, is there a downside to telling our agent not to accept love letters?
Well, I mean, we can jump pretty into how we work on the listing side. And the biggest thing we do is try to remove kind of risk for our sellers, right? Under fair housing and kind of things of that nature. So advocating for our sellers, we kind of strip any identifying feature. We get rid of names, anything that could, the recourse could be, you violated fair housing. And so we kind of present just the numbers and the facts.
Right.
But we also don't get love letters all that much. I know we got a ton during like the busy season, call it 2022, but you mean not so much anymore.
The peak of the market, not the busy season. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're right. The way we protect our seller from liability is we remove identifying information from the offer when we present the offer to them. And if there are multiple offers, that means putting things into a table, the merits of the offer into a table. And that does include some things like the realtor's reputation, how many years they've been licensed. Was there a love letter, but we won't actually put the contents of the love letter. But we also remove the identifying information from their names. We just use initials. And the reason we do that is because if somebody of a protected class were to submit an offer and you chose an offer that was similar, but from somebody that looks like you, whatever you might look like, and doesn't look like them, you open a higher probability risk that somebody's going to claim fair housing discrimination. And we don't really want to participate in that. With that said, there may be an occasion to look at love letters from the listing side. And that's because homes that are purchased by people or offers that are written by people that are emotionally attached may have a higher probability of closing than offers that are by an investor, for example. Investors are all about the numbers. They shouldn't be getting emotionally attached. And if the buyer has friends, family nearby, they personalize themselves, become human when they write the offer, there is arguably a better chance that they're going to be closing. But of course, they could also be pretending all of those things. And during the peak of the post-COVID bubble, I'm going to call it a bubble, even though I'm not. That's probably the first time anybody's used that term. But prices have come down.
Nobody's ever called it a bubble. Yeah.
I mean, they've come down. At the peak, there were investors pretending to be personal home buyers. And we saw that repeatedly with certain agents in town who represented those investors and then had them write love letters that were completely untrue. Now, the flip side is if you're a buyer, you don't run the risk of a fair housing lawsuit. And if you're in a competitive situation, you may want to include a letter with some caveats that it may be possible to offend the seller. It could be that you don't know their situation. If they're going through a divorce, do you really want to write a letter that says, oh, my beautiful, happy family, we just got married, can't wait to start our lives together? Because a divorce-motivated sale, there's a lot of negative emotions usually tied up in that. And they may feel negatively toward your offer. Like you may touch on a really painful point in their lives. So be really careful. We have seen and represented sellers that were so offended by the buyer's behavior that they didn't want to accept any offer from the buyer. And they made it really clear that they weren't even going to counter what was a reasonable offer because they felt that the buyer had been so disrespectful in their showing up late, staying late, and then acting in an arrogant fashion when they met the seller accidentally. And all of that really turned off the seller. They got really annoyed by this and they refused to counter. And at the time, the seller told me that they was going to send a very intense message to the buyer that had some profanity in it. I'm just going to say it because this is an adult podcast. And he said to me, this is going to sound like an FU to the buyer. And that's exactly what I'm telling them. And I said, oh my, okay, can we talk about this a little bit? Like, we're trying to sell
my name on
home.
it too. Yeah.
But that's the message he wanted to send, and that's what we did. At the end of the day, we advise and our clients make the call. So yes, there are definite downsides to accepting love letters, and there may be a downside to telling the agent not to accept love letters in that you don't get them. And in the event there are multiple very similar offers, you may want to go to these letters to see if there's information that might be useful. But keep in mind that opening those envelopes also increases your liability, and we would advise you not to do it. However, if you wish to do it, then go ahead. We also would encourage you to consider opening the envelope after you've already accepted the offer if you really want to know who these people are. Because often that's what's motivating people to read the love letter, is they would like to know who their cherished home is being passed on to and hopefully feel some connection with those people. That's really best done after you've accepted their offer than before you've accepted their offer.
I'll say double-edged sword though, if you read the love letter as a seller, say you're already on a contract and that love letter is just beautifully crafted, are you then kind of like emotionally bound to seeing the deal through? Like, are you letting yourself be a little bit more lenient when inspection comes up and just because, I really love these guys,
100%. That's the other part. And yeah. I will admit there are times in the deal where I know my clients are just such lovely, adorable humans that having them meet their counterparty will cause their counterparty to be less aggressive. And
that's cool.
I've encouraged that in rare occasions because I know it'll make the deal go smoother.
Yeah.
That these are such nice people and such pillars of the community and such straight shooters. And if they just were to meet, the other side is going to stop being such jerks in the negotiation. Yeah. Such inappropriate behavior they will no longer, look for cosmetic and trivial issues on inspection because they know how ridiculous it is. So there are advantages to having people meet. There are also disadvantages. And again, I will say this for the record, our clients are going to make the call. We're just going to advise them on the pathway forward and their options and what some of the pros and cons, what some of the pitfalls might be in choosing a certain direction. All right, let's move on to the next question. Hamish, I think you should read it.
backed out of contract 1 hour before closing. Should I start with the update? Probably not.
No. Don't start with the update. We'll do the update at the end.
Okay. This is by Unhappy Narwhal 820, which I'm assuming is an auto-generated name.
Because we all know all narwhals are happy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sea unicorns. Anyhow, husband and I went under contract on a house on March 1st. Had inspections completed, nothing really major wrong with the house. We agreed to fix these things, no issues at all while waiting to close. Today was closing day. We ended up backing out of the deal 1 hour before closing because the seller's daughter claimed she had tenants' rights at the house. There was no leasing agreement and her name is nowhere to be found on the deed. All of her belongings and dog were moved back into the house this past weekend, knowing her parents were closing on the house today. This past weekend, she called the cops, and they even helped her get back into the house. Even broke off the doorknob to the front door. I show up at 4 to do my final walkthrough, and we can't get into the house because she's in there. We called the cops, and they claim that she is a resident there, even though she doesn't have a legal binding document that says so. I'm thinking about going ahead for time on this story.
Skip ahead. We can skip it.
Yeah. This just blows my mind. Cops advised us to get a civil attorney as it is now a civil matter and there's nothing they can do. A few weeks ago, the sellers were trying to push up the closing day, and now we know why, because of their deranged daughter. Now we're back to looking for a house. We spent $1,100 in inspections and $1,000 in EMD. What's that?
Earnest money deposit.
Oh, I should know that. Do you want the update now or should we wait?
Okay, so let's just jump in. The question is, anyone else ever go through something like this?
Yeah.
So first of all, you're lucky you got your earnest money deposit back, and that's a trivial number. 1,000 is like joke for earnest money. $1,100 in inspections sounds about right for our local market. Here you might see a $25,000 or $50,000 earnest money deposit, depending on the purchase price. And this is the reason you should do a walkthrough, because the home is supposed to be delivered free of personal possessions and obviously free of occupants. And if it's not being delivered that way, then the seller is in default. So the update was, and this is, I'm going to read the update. The sellers were kind enough to reimburse us our $1,100 for inspections, and we get our earnest money deposit back. For everyone asking, this happened in Ohio. All right, well, I can tell you that they almost certainly didn't have a choice but to give you your earnest money deposit back. And they probably gave you your inspection money back just so that this put it to rest and you went away. But this is why you do walkthroughs. Even if you're buying a property as an investor, you want to make sure it's being delivered to you in the condition that you expect it to be delivered. If you're an investor, you should be getting estoppel statements, and frankly, you should be scheduling a video call with the tenants to verify that everything is complete, not just the estoppel statement. So estoppel statements, if you're not familiar, are statements that show the rent, the terms of the lease, the security deposit, et cetera, and you want the tenant verifying what you think to be true. And a family member that has become a squatter is a very unusual situation. And I can't imagine how challenging that would be, other than be really grateful that you didn't buy the house and then have to deal with an eviction of the deranged family member who's now living in the house and squatting. With that said, I have heard of squatting being a big problem in certain cities where people have gone into vacation homes and aren't leaving, and the police can't do anything because they sure as heck look like residents. And I've heard of some mafia-style solutions that don't involve the police, but involve baseball bats and very, very aggressive humans that will break into the house. They'll stake out the house, and then when the squatters leave, for whatever reason, they'll break in,
squat,
empty everything onto the street, change the locks, and then guard the property armed. And it's a very aggressive solution, but I've heard of people doing it to get their houses back. We don't typically have squatter issues. I've never had a house with a squatter issue. I've never heard of a house with a squatter issue in Boulder. I suspect there might be a rare case in Denver or elsewhere on the Front Range, but it's not a thing so far. Knock on wood that it doesn't change.
To my knowledge, it's like 22 or so years before you can get that kind of right here in Colorado.
Well, you're talking about something different. You're talking about adverse possession.
Yes.
I'm talking about squatting.
Yep.
And eviction process. And in some cities, evictions are very long and difficult. And getting somebody who's squatting in your house without a lease, even if you called the police, they may not be able to help you, which is crazy. So, no, adverse possession is an entirely 100%. That's 20-something years.
To my understanding, adverse possession is the word for squatting here in Colorado. But I might be mistaken. I might have to check that out.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting topic, Hamish. I mean, the way it's normally done so the adverse possession cases I know about are typically land cases where people have been using the land openly and notoriously without the owner's permission, adverse to the owner's interest or permission. And they've done that for so many years that they now have a legal claim to it. Squatting in colloquially, it's hard to say that word, in common parlance is much shorter lived. Like these are people that manage to take possession of a private residence for a few years until finally the owner finds a way to get rid of them. But I haven't heard of a squatter in a structure anytime. I've never heard of a squatter actually getting possession and ownership.
Not in Colorado, but I've heard it, and there's like squatters' rights and other stuff with that, and that's just a whole nother thing. But what a insane r/realtors.
So I might be wrong on the legal distinction. You might be right that they're the same thing, but in practice, that's what I care about. And in practice, if you have a vacant home, you really should strongly consider having cameras installed. And if it looks like people have begun squatting in your home, you need to be aggressive and fast to get these people out of your home quickly. Yeah. And unfortunately, if you have a family with mental health issues, there's other things to worry about. Compassion, dealing with that situation. And these buyers were lucky they got their money back, but what a nightmare.
Yeah, no kidding. Feel for the solos.
Yeah. Okay, let's hit the last one, and then we're going to wrap up. Promise you a short pod, and that's what you're getting. So this is by an individual named Icy Vacations 6023, and they are a home seller. And the title of the post is "Deal Fell Through at Closing." They write, "Pretty emotionally shot. Been trying to sell my house for various reasons, and the deal fell through at the finish line. Apparently the buyer opened a furniture line of credit before the closing, and it derailed the whole lending approval on the day of closing. It's been a roller coaster of emotions with 3 closing date extensions, and now this. Does this for sure mean the deal is off completely, or do you think we can push closing again to make it work? I don't want either to happen, but this has been dragged out for 8 weeks now, and I just need it sold." All right, so I'm gonna just jump in here, preempt Hamish. And
yeah, please
Hamish,
do.
I want to hear your take on this. But when people on the buy side, when our clients say, "I just want to use the cheapest lender I can find," one of the things we warn them about is that the internet lender has no skin in the game, and they may not give the counseling and advice and hand-holding that a local lender does. And when the internet lender screws up, they don't have reputational risk either, because they're just this giant machine that
amorphous corp.
Yeah, and their people aren't paid as well, and they're replaceable, versus the local lender, and we have a list of 5 or 7 that we know and love. They have a track record and they have a reputation to protect, and they know that their business is going to fall apart if they start having shenanigans. So I blame this entirely on the lender, not telling this buyer that you should not make any major purchases between going under contract and closing, particularly anything that involves your credit. So do not buy a car, do not get a furniture line of credit, do not make any major purchases, because it can affect your credit rating, which can then kill the deal. And in Colorado, there are 2 loans that are relevant for the lender or the loan side. One is loan terms, and the other is loan approval. And loan terms deals with the interest rate, the down payment, the term of the loan. And loan approval is the lender's deadline to approve your loan. And the lender's deadline to approve your loan is usually very close to the closing date. And if the buyer loses their job, or screws up their credit rating, or took all the down payment and no longer has the down payment, right? You could argue they no longer can get the loan approval. You could also argue that they may have intentionally done that to terminate the deal. I no longer have my down payment. I lost my down payment because I took it gambling. That's probably an arguable one. And I was privy to a deal right here in Boulder where, this came right from this person's mouth. She is a very well-known real estate agent here in Boulder. I'm not going to say much else about her.
I'm going to try and figure out if I know.
Yeah, you do know her, and she plays a little different than we do. And she told me that her buyer had to get out of the contract because of a death in the family. Between when they wrote the offer and got accepted, got through inspection, and then a family member died, and a couple were fighting, and they just had to terminate the deal. So she terminated it on loan approval. And I believe this was back when there weren't two deadlines. There was just one deadline called loan approval, not lender's approval of the loan, just loan approval.
Okay.
And she checked the box of loan approval, sent it in, and messaged the listing agent, I'm so sorry, they're not getting approved for their loan. And the listing agent didn't miss a blink, immediately called the lender and said, hey, how's the loan going? And the lender's like, loan's looking great, we're lined up for closing. Great, thank you. She called back the buyer's agent and said, what's going on? Because you have loan approval. The loan's on track. Mm-hmm. And that's when she started to backpedal and say, oh, no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used that checkbox. It's really something going on with these guys. They can't buy the house. And it's personal. Well, guess what? The seller didn't take it that way. They weren't passionate. And this was a big earnest money. It
feels kind of sneaky.
My memory says it was $100,000 earnest money deposit. It was a big ticket house, a luxury home. And they ended up in dispute over the earnest money. And at the end of the day, I think the seller eventually gave the buyer back half. But it was a whole nother round of negotiation, and the agents aren't involved. This is lawyers involved. This is mediation, and ultimately that's where they ended up was getting back a portion of their very large earnest money deposit. If I'm on the sell side of that, I got to tell you that there are people that are very principled, and they will punish you for being dishonest. And being in the words of one of my favorite clients, when the other side did something very unethical, he just called them weasels. He's like, oh, they're weasels, right? Yeah. In his mind, they had moved into the weasel category of humanity, and he wasn't going to cut them any slack for being weasels. So be careful what you do.
And who's to say, would it not have turned out different if the buyers tried to be honest,
I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Other than
it's too late to find out because you tried to be a weasel.
You've already tried to be a weasel. And, at the end of the day, usually people are compassionate about things like deaths in the family, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you could have negotiated some sort of release of earnest money without being a weasel. Yeah. And at the same time, it's the client that makes the call, right? So if I was in the same situation and my client said, look, I want you to check the box for loan approval, I'm going to tell them, I'm going to check the box, and then I'm going to stop talking to the other side because I have to do what you ask me to do. I represent you. But at the same time...
And also tell the lender to shut it.
Right. Tell the lender to stop. Don't answer any phone calls from the buyer's agent, from the listing agent. I don't like doing that, okay? It's super rare that our clients ask us to do something like that. I would say it's been maybe once a decade that we're put in that circumstance. And we have to remember we have a legal obligation to represent our client's best interest, even when they're behaving in shady ways. So, but we do our best to keep our buyers behaving ethically with transparency and behaving in ways that engender trust, buyers and sellers. That's the key.
Yeah.
But we got to do sometimes what you got to do, and that's a really weird and awkward circumstance. So this particular seller is screwed, and I think they should cut bait. Fish or cut bait? They should cut bait, I think is what it's called.
Cut losses.
Cut their losses is what we're trying to say, and move on. Because this particular buyer does not, after multiple extensions, and you're headed into the spring selling season. All right.
I feel for the situation too, because they got a line of credit on furniture. I'm guessing the buyers were just stoked to be getting a home, and just nobody told them not to get a line of, crappy situation. But with that, that's the ending of the little pod here.
That is.
Yeah. Have we mentioned why?
I'm sorry?
Have we mentioned why it's the little pod?
I mean, just because we have an opportunity to create more content. Plus, we also want continuity because there are time periods when we're super slammed and we don't have time to do an hour and a half podcast. And this subreddit is so full of interesting stories that deserve a professional response. So we feel like it's a good source of conversation and questions to be answered. Also, we can illustrate our thinking on the matter. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you did, let us know, and maybe we'll do some more of this from the subreddit style podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about the House Einstein brokerage, you'll find us at houseeinstein.com. Thank you so much for listening. Hamish, anything to add?
Stay tuned on our YouTube. We've got a bunch of listings coming up. It's part of the reason why we're doing an abridged podcast, so I can have the bandwidth to get these edited and get them out. So should be, when this podcast published, a lot of cool listings already up or coming up in a couple days.
That's
Stay
right.
tuned.
Clients always come first.
Always.
And that's a very valid point, Hamish. I agree with that completely.
Alrighty.
All right.
See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you. Bye.